marginalized, which I do like.
It's apparently not
but
cultural.
well, we want
Do
to
you
we
like
want to be with family.
diversity and like is this what you want? Like
Diversity.
Do you like diversity and
Food,
inclusion and like
More than 12
cosmopolitanism?
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're
So
so
you say
high
about
maintenance.
Yes. I know. No, I know. Oh my God. I know. Yeah. There's plenty to say about that.
Wow, what a meanie.
No,
Okay,
but
it's live streaming, just so you know.
Right now?
In case you
Since
you
when?
don't want to.
Oh,
Since
I
when?
can stop it.
When did it
no,
start
no.
live streaming?
That's not the problem. We were just talking
When did
about
it start
a
live streaming?
position.
Oh no, I just started it now.
Oh.
After you ended a sentence and then I hit start.
Oh, okay.
So
cool.
live stream
Yeah,
people,
That's a
I'm
good
sorry
thing.
you missed that sentence. Apparently it was good. But
Okay, yeah.
It's a
lot
tradition
of
to make a
gossip here.
broader announcement, people in the room, something like that.
So everyone, they're going to introduce it in a second, but we're live streaming now, just so you know, in case you want to watch your words. You can't hear probably people in the background. You can just still say your words.
Let me bring up that
Where is this streaming at?
YouTube, supposedly.
Yeah, but like, how do we get this link? Where is
Hey,
it?
let me see if I'll share it on Twitter. I'll see if I
Yeah,
can.
share it on
so
Twitter.
you're at Berkeley.
Let's see. Here's a share button
yeah.
on Twitter.
Awesome.
Can I customize this? Sure.
Can you also change screens so that one comes, or is it just gonna be this perspective?
I know, right?
Do you need me to change? I can.
It goes in so many
No,
Turn it.
like no,
But at
as
some
in
point
like
it's
if you
just
can like do.
stuff
No.
because it's like it's trailing
Okay,
off
there it
into
is.
many
Copying
different
this, I'm gonna
places,
tweet it
and
out.
I'm not sure why or how.
Yeah, like it definitely like isn't as reading space anymore. It's definitely still a very large space. But I'm in the new media.
Oh no, this me bought my head.
Okay.
Sorry, folks.
Scale is
Okay.
Immediately before me.
Yeah.
The what?
Who goes before me?
I don't know. I'm first. That's all I know.
I love
Because I was thinking it'd probably be good if they just played the thing rather than we go up and
Right,
play it and
yeah.
go back down. But
So this animation department just confirmed that so that if that gives you
Okay.
a sense of where
You should be able to get to it
the
now.
process and
there it comes.
Mark, there's no chance that you okay, good. It's not unplugged. That's right.
So I was with the digital communities of
And then I'll put the
2000
the live stream on. You'll sort of be able to see what my computer sees. There's a little time.
Oh, but there is like that time lag. How interesting.
I like it.
Yeah, and I mean, granted, I was
Like you're still
And do you
you're
want
there, but you're right there too.
You want to test?
Oh my god. It's like
Happy of
oh
yourself.
wow. It's like two different time zones. It's like I'm seeing the future looking at you, but which time is the real time?
Audience at home, just to be clear, this is not part of the
at the University
It's
of
not
Chicago,
intended to be.
This is part of my
was
performance.
working as a
Okay, let me see if it.
The time
See if it works.
But remotely,
Hello, it is cool.
So there's.
I just wanted to find like an academic
I like it.
part of, and I lived all of a mile from the campus.
Ooh.
So I mentioned earlier, tweeted
Yeah.
out like, "Hey, DH working group today, come join us." And so I just continued. And then one thing.
All right, welcome everyone to Escape Keys Readings of Electronic Literature. Thank you for coming out. Yay! We made it. Things are plugged into other things. Audio is moving down wires and into chips and out of speakers. I feel very cautiously optimistic about this engagement with the ephemerality of digital media and the embodied presence of digital media presentation.
Sorry.
So this series of high wire acts, that was a time delay on the live stream, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
It's the past.
From from your laptop to Google's cloud to Mark's phone in 15 seconds or less. But we have a wonderful lineup tonight. We have Alex Sohm, Mark C. Marino, Scott Retberg, Claudia Natalie von Vacano, pardon me, and me. If there is time. We will be trying to keep to time. Everyone's going to be working on this so that we can get all of our speakers, some of whom have been awake for over 40 hours at this point, that's the glamorous road life of the rock academic. And we're going to try to get them to downtown to feed them at 7:30. They've left the building open for us, so we'll be locking it up at that time when we leave. So we unfortunately this particular event won't have an extended after party, but please raid the snacks heavily on your way out. And if you feel like trying to roll a printer across campus, tonight is the night to go for it because the print spot is totally unguarded. It might be digital performance art. With that said, we're going to proceed in program order, which means that our first reading is Alex.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yay!
See, I don't know where I am because of the delay, so I can't really. I'm not on screen yet.
And the volume is right here.
It's like I'm not here. It's really interesting. Okay, so I'm going to show you something from a thing I've been working on. It's called the Offline Website Project. So I'm going to call it TWOP. And TWOP is a domestic disruption. I'm going to read from my phone. I wrote this though, so it's myself. It's a domestic disruption of the distributed logic of the global web. Meant to run I'm making the sites in my house, and they are meant to stay in my house in my home computer, and they can't be copied or shared or replicable or in any way. So the point is that it's like a site-specific intervention on the web, making it homey. So you can come to my house, sit with me, and play these websites. Alternatively, like any sort of performance-based discipline, you can get video documentation. So what actually circulates as these videos of me playing my own website, and you're going to sit with that for about 11 minutes. Within TWOP, like I said, there's domestic constraints, like I said, imply that the sites will rarely be experienced in their true interactive form, but you'll sort of, constrained to video documentation. In a way, the webbiness of these sites is stripped from the global network to be rooted deeply at home, like I said. And I'm going to show you one of the sites. It's called Beauty Routine, which also, if you want to go to Berkeley, it's at the Hyperobjects exhibit that we're showing there at the Worth Writer Gallery. The world go to Berkeley and do this. So I'm showing Beauty Routine, like I said, and it is a poetic commentary on the possibility of thinking beauty only in local terms. So seeing beauty as always pertaining to a physical body. And as most of my work, if you know it, this involves thinking about my own displacement and my beauty as a foreign female body in the United States, and how this relates to the larger spaces I occupy and the environmental impact of this occupation, right? So there's a lot of, well, you'll see it. So, again, here's the website that you're going to see. And because you're going to see a website, you're going to have to deal with my timing of clicking, and this can be very frustrating, but I think the lack of agency is important. So, can you read? Come closer, get cozy.
It's actually better on the screen.
Can you read this?
Yeah.
Ta-da! That's it. Next person. I don't know why I'm moving places because I didn't fit here awkwardly in the middle. So ta-da.
Next up on the program, we have
Yeah.
welcome.
You are gonna have nightmares with it.
Hi everybody, thank you all for coming. Thank you Jeremy for organizing this. Thank you Scott and Alex for instigating it. So my name is Mark Marino. I teach at USC. I run something called the Humanities and Critical Code Studies Lab, and I'm overly invested in the humanities folks reading computer source code. What I'm about to show you guys is it's a brand new project. It's only been out for maybe a month, and it's in a competition called the Interactive Fiction Competition. Anybody ever hear of that before? So this happens every year, a wonderful competition. This year there are 82 games in it, and you should go play them all. They're all amazing. I have to apologize. I'm a little bit excited about this project, but I'm so excited about it, I think it's impossible for me to see its various weaknesses or even what it could possibly be. Actually, it's easy for me to see what it could be beyond this, so I'm just going to show you a little bit of it. So the couple things you need to know about this. The first thing is this is made largely in the language Python. And how many of you guys are familiar with the language Python at all? Okay, that's like, the home audience should know that was everybody. Pretty much. And then how many of you guys are familiar with Jupyter Notebooks? Raise your hand. Okay, so Jupyter Notebook is an environment in which you can work on Python, but you can also surrounded by text. So imagine like a nice Google Doc, and then there's like these little code snippets everywhere. Except one thing, those code snippets can be compiled, can be executed. So now, how many of you guys are familiar with Google Collaboratories? One more. So we have like 3, 4 people. So now there's a Google tool that allows you to put Jupyter Notebooks live online and share them with people the way you would a Google Doc, right? So for someone like me who does critical code studies, or this thing that I call critical code studies, which all of you should do as well, it's phenomenal, right? At least for Python, right? And of course, there are other platforms you can do this for other languages. But this idea that you could share the code, it could be compiled and executed live, and then you could put text around it. Of course, you could do that with documentation, but this is more fun than that, believe me. But I was talking about this with a friend of mine who teaches programming over at UCLA named Todd Milstein. He's in their computer science department. He teaches computer language design. And he said offhandedly, he should never have said this to me, he said, oh, I bet you could make one of your works of electronic literature out of that. So I thought about it for a second, and I said, I bet you could. So that's what I've done. So I'll only go and show you a little bit of this, because my introduction went on far too long. So what I've done is I've taken Flight of the Code Monkeys, and I've made a copy of it into, I think this is Alex's Google Drive. Sorry, Alex.
Thank you.
And so it looks kind of like this piece, and the main text happens over here. Let's see there we go. And then over on the side, you'll notice there's like a list of all these tasks. So the premise is this, that you, because it's an interactive fiction, although it's written in first person, you are this person whose job, there's your name, Coder2579, and you work for something called the system, as perhaps we all know. But your job is to correct its code, and you only ever get a portion of the code at a time. You imagine there are lots of these other people. You've been working for them for 4 years or whatever, 3.5 years or 4 years, whatever it is, and then you have 3 days until your next holiday. So your only job right now is to correct the code. And if you correct it correctly, you don't make any errors, then you'll get your vacation. And your vacation is terrible, by the way, but we'll get to that later. So it looks like this, and actually this was Eric Lawyer's idea, that there are these little task numbers, so that it helps, you can sort of navigate through them. But there's a sequence of tasks, and basically it says, most of them are go through the code and compile it. So here's this first little bit of code. I'm going to compile it. Say no thanks here. And then it says, go on to the next step. Okay, great. And we can read that code if we want to, but like this code, I've had to obfuscate all of this code, or otherwise it would be not a very interesting experience for you. So like it's very purposefully obfuscated. And I'm well aware of the hazards of that, I would think, perhaps more than anybody. But in any case, although one person did say, I've taken the #1 tactic of programmers for job security and made it into an interactive fiction, although that was not my goal. In any case, here I'll read you a tiny bit. I'm not gonna read too much of this, but let's see what our main character says. Most of the code is meaningless to me. I think they use human words just to distract us. 3 days. Just need to make it through 3 days, and then it gives you the instruction of what to do. It's simple, really mindless. Or how does that algo mantra go? Type correct the type is correct. So, something like that. All I know is every .instruction equals vacay _wait -1. Hashtag or # for comments. Or every instruction I follow brings me one step closer to vacay. All right, so now we got our next one. And here it says, once again, just compile the code. So we're just gonna follow directions for a little while. I'll read you a little bit of this one. This one looks like it's a little meatier. Even though we're basically on the same track, the people in Sector 48E2, so we're in this dystopian future, obviously, I guess. I'll always get their vacations early, so I won't be seeing Marta for a while. So Marta is this love interest that's introduced, which is okay because you can't always get what you want. Though I didn't see her during the last break either. Maybe this just wasn't meant to be. Not in the code, so to speak. Ha ha ha. We're all basically code after all. DNA, RNA, press play, or plus play as the case may be on that typo. Cute, teaching us to greet our masters. Oh, and so here's one of the actions. It says change, print, respond, whatever to hello system. So let's see if we can find that line. There it is right there. So I'm going to go in and see, this is the beauty of it. Like, so the interaction, I mean, like this piece isn't all that good, but the idea of it, I'm pretty sure is good. And so the interaction, the choice of the interaction here is like, are we going to follow the system's request or not? And we could do something else entirely if we want to, but I'm going to put in here hello system, but I could also put in like, hello Noah if I wanted to, right? And then let's see, hopefully I didn't break anything. My Python's not that great. There, hello Noah it says. So that's our little hello world moment. Of course, I wouldn't even know Marta without this job. I wouldn't be anywhere, so we get a little more backstory. And then I'm going to sort of skip ahead a little bit. So then every once in a while, our narrator comes up with ideas about how he'd like to change the code. So he's got this little thing we could insert if we wanted to. Or suggests, the code here suggests that you could change the color in this code here from blue to red. Okay, so we could change color over here to either blue or red. And then our narrator explains that the system every once in a while gives them like a meaningless choice just to sort of make him feel like he has some sort of agency. I don't know if this feels familiar to anybody, but in any case. So I don't know if I'm going to, what color should we make it? Do we care? Blue or red? Blue. Okay, blue it is. All right, we'll change it to blue. And then we'll press our little play button, and it says great. See, we got rewarded for making our little change. So as you're reading the story, another character comes along. We get contacted by something called the Resistance. And the Resistance asks us to make different changes than the ones that we were informed to make by the system. And so essentially in this story, you're choosing between, are you going to listen to the system? Are you going to listen to the Resistance? Or are you going to listen to somebody else? So one of the really weird parts of this code, the weirdest part I think, is that I've added these little like conversation agents that are in here that are made out of Python strings. It is like the worst coding you could possibly imagine, but it is in here. So if we want to contact Marta, we get this little like choose your own adventure-y conversation we can have with her. Let's see. She says, Marta says, what's up? So we can either say, we can either let her know our feelings, or we could suggest going on vacation now. Which one do you want to do? So how many people think 2? How many people say 3? All right, I'm going to say the 3s have it. So we'll go to 3. This is like going back to our the unknown days. I should have like a bell or something. Let's see, it says, Marta says, wow, great, how? Okay, so do you want to type, I'll finish the code quickly, or nothing, I'll just turn on my VR headset now. Okay, so how many people want to say, I'll finish the code quickly? And how many people want to just say nothing and they'll turn on their VR headsets? Okay, all right, that's a consensus, so let's do it. I turn on my VR headset and power it up. Wait, it's already powered up. I've been in the VR system all along. Wait, I remember. I'm in Palo Alto, working on a future sim for a startup. I was just going to test the system. Wow, that was intense. All right, what's next? Do you want to type oppose the system or reveal the resistance? Which one should we do? Oh, sorry, oppose the system, raise your hands. Reveal the resistance, raise your hands. Oh, man. Okay. All right, your choice.
Let's just pretend.
And then it says, Marta says, so I say, I can do it. I can reveal the resistance. Think of all the vacay time they'll give me if I do this. And Marta doesn't answer. Do I want to say just kidding, or do I want to tell her that this is for her? How many people want to say just kidding? How many people say this is for her? Okay, all right, that sounds like everybody. And then she said, so I'm doing this for you, I say. And Marta says, please don't bring me into this. Oh, man. Guys, that didn't go well. Let me just say that. Anyway, the heart of the game, though, I mean, that's like whatever. Like any interactive fiction could do this. But the heart of this game is that all of this is made out of live code. In the way I've designed this one, and I'm sure I'm hoping just people will just do many different things with this idea. This one is very sequential. You do have to like compile the code in order, except for that last little bit I just did, or else it really will break. I mean, I don't have a good way around it for this particular story. But my favorite piece of the code wasn't even suggested by me. It was suggested by John Murray. He had this idea that, let me see where it shows up. And this is a spoiler for any of you guys who want to like enjoy things, like turn off your live streams, anybody at home or anything. So he came up with this idea that, okay, so the part of the way this code works is if you make certain choices within the context of the game, it'll have certain print statements. I mean, it's like really simple code, blah, blah, blah. But if you make an error in the code somewhere, right, that's kind of on you, and you got to figure out what you, like if you made an error, you made an error. Like this is, like it's a story game. Like the story game can't do very much about that until we took over the exception handling. And so when you do that, largely through this code right here, the flea picker, which a lot of people don't trust for whatever reason, that the system tells you to turn on, then if you make an error while you're programming, the system counts that as one of your errors and then takes time away or adds time to when you get your next vacation. So at that point, programming itself, right, so making yourself legible to the system is what the game is all about. Or, of course, you know, maybe that's not your goal at all. And obviously, like, this is really a really weird implementation of it. Like, again, I've given myself extra hassles that I don't need to give myself by saying, like, the system is running the game and the system is the game, et cetera, et cetera. But I hope you guys can see a little bit of the potential for this as a platform for interactive storytelling. And I'll tell you one more thing about this, which is it is definitely, we're having a critical code studies working group in 2020, the beginning of the year, which you're all invited to participate in. That's online. Jeremy will help me organize it, hopefully, with all of his spare time. But what I will say is, we're definitely going to be using this platform to do some critical code readings of some Python because, again, kind of the thing we've been chasing for a long time has been how to collaboratively annotate code in a way that's like rewarding and enriching. And so the idea that people would be able to comment on something like Taroko Gorge, the Python itself, as it's operating in front of them, is too rich. Anyway, thank you guys very much.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy, especially for all the work involved in putting this event together. I appreciate what you did for us, especially. And thanks to everyone for being here. Let me read a little bit of this. I am eating now. I consume rattle as we suffer from the network. I'm preparing Korean doti barbel as the world ignores the end of the world. I will devour sandhill crane as we suffer from world peace. I'm preparing Angora as my mind turns to incoherent babbling. I will devour vermilion rockfish as my mind turns to sleepwalking. I will devour guinea fowl as we suffer from sex. I consume spot-fin porcupine fish as I think about the prophet. I am preparing griffin vulture as I think about the ceaseless roar. I'm preparing shrew as I despair over mansplaining. I'm preparing fox squirrel as I despair over the imminent horizon. I will devour king parrot as I consider the end of the world. That was a Twitter bot, but I hardly ever read the Twitter bot about mass extinction. This is a film. This is a combinatory sonnet generator film called Penelope, and it's going to run 3 times each, run about 4 minutes, and there'll be a pause in the middle where you can read the text. And we just need missions.
I would stare for hours at an empty shore. In every hour, a reason to regret. I would shed all these visions I deplore. My My fingers cut on threads of empty net. Nothing worse than gruesome bile thick with hate. When the last great cat has finally purred. Nothing fertile in this abandoned state. If we asked for blessings, God have demurred. For swamps and bogs where hopeless bodies float. Wash my yearning lips, wet my tongue profane. All suitors their interests alone promote. Swim your dark shadows in my feathered brain. We can never happy ending assume. Our garden bereft of flowers that bloom. Swim with knife in teeth, come destroy the vein. Or the parasites and usurpers smote. Wash swollen joints, pricked skin, this ceaseless pain. For wretched shores where broken bodies bloat. If we can't see clearly, our vision blurred. Nothing for the cock that crowed too late. When minks are pelted and are stripped unfurred. Nothing to feed our maidens but rotting bait. My future predestined, a fractured set. I would pry your wrecked ship from ocean floor. In fulfillment of a prophetic bet. I would slit the throat of our finest bull. I would touch weathered flesh with skin of crone. In our fields neglected crops wither brown. I would have your skin, sinews to me sewn. My glass reflects worry near to breakdown. nothing but usurpers here cheek by jowl. When the last Javan tiger has not bred, nothing but sacrifice, but birds to disembowel. If progeny ceases, our hopes we shed. For each soldier's widow that war bereave. Wash over me golden, yearning and tanned. All the children we will never conceive. Swim to shore, free me from my prison land. We are as threads too tangled to unwind. Our fate is as we, to it, are resigned. Swim as if the waves you yourself command. All gods will fall as we do not believe. Wash contagion from this our poisoned land. For broken bones that suffer butchers cleave. If dawn lights a beard, the morning I dread. Nothing left for the banshee but to howl. When wicked hunter mounts last lion's head. Nothing at table, neither fish nor fowl. My thighs quiver in a threadbare nightgown. I would fingers touch, I would sigh and moan. In time you fall, a fool, a shawl, a crown. I would sit still and gather moss on stone.
Okay, so I'll stop there for time. So the piece was with Roderick Coover, filmmaker, and Alejandro Albornoz, who's a composer.
I would sit a vigil at Hades.
And so it's recombining, it's sort of based on Quinault's 100,000 Billion Poems in terms of the structure, except that it writes a sonnet, and then at the 13th line, it breaks at the couplet, and then rewrites the same rhyme scheme in reverse. So the idea is that it winds and unwinds like Penelope's thread. And we shot it in Kefalonia, which is the island where Homer historically is believed to be from. So and it'll run for three cycles without repeating
Next up.
Do you want to?
Let's back up.
I'm Claudia Famacano, and I'm going to first show you a short video, and then I will do a short synopsis of reading.
Riot Girl was definitely the start of a lot of things.
I just wish that I had something that I could go to and talk to other women and actually just sit and talk.
Finally, we're getting some recognition because punk is so stale and it's got its own set of rules now, and it's so conformist and just it's become exactly what it fought against.
Big sign on the door. This courthouse, no women allowed.
And now girls are kind of like, well, we've had enough now. We want our revolution. We want our time to speak out and scream out and fight back and be heard.
A lot of early Riot Girl music specifically talked about sexual abuse, either incest or sometimes date rape, but more sexual abuse in the home. And it was music that I think for me first made visible, you know, kind of what girls' condition was in the private spaces that were supposed to be protective for them.
Being a Riot Girl or not being a Riot Girl. Not being a Riot Girl means just sort of being vaguely dissatisfied and vaguely kind of like self-loathing and vaguely passive and beaten down by, you know, sexist society. Where being in Riot Girl means you can talk about things, work things, process it.
This is kind of my story, how I remember it now. Although I don't trust my own mind. You see, I'm only 7 years old, and already I have a lifetime of memories weighing me down.
It was just me talking with friends and realizing what they've gone through. Like, a lot of them weren't really sure. They just had, like, dreams, memories, flashbacks, and then just putting together the pieces and finally recognizing what had happened to them. It seemed like the more everybody opened up, the more we realized just what had happened. Hopefully, you know, if people can be open about it, then it won't happen so much.
My estimation, it's like the talking part of shows is just as important as the singing part, or when any kind of violence erupts, like stopping shows and dealing with it right off instead of like just pretending it's not happening. Because that's what, like, you know, my parents always did, pretend nothing was happening and just let it get worse.
I was really fascinated by the idea of taking the little girl image and reworking it, like, and making it be about being loud and aggressive and powerful and obnoxious and all the things that really seem to get on a lot of people's nerves out of the Riot Girl movement.
This girl thinks she's the queen of the forever. I got news for you. Say it!
And I had it written that my father raped me in the Washington Post without my permission. I'm not willing to deal with the mainstream anymore. When they're constantly asking questions about if I've been a stripper, if I haven't been a stripper, constantly just completely sexist shit, where they're trying to turn the band that I'm in and the projects I'm involved with against other women who I respect.
If I were to take their criticism to heart, ignore Riot Girl, where would I be today? I would be a passive consumer of culture.
What Riot Girl and a lot of other women in a lot of, you know, in a lot of different forms, what they've done is like produce their own media and like flood the media system in whatever way they can with their own media, saying, no, this is what a woman is, this is what a woman is, this is what a woman is. If people were willing to pay for and accept more challenging media would become a more positive force.
Reading the Riot Girl fanzines made me aware of how bad the media had gone, and it sort of just threw it into sharp relief.
when Riot Girls decided to stop talking to the media, that really pissed people off. With Riot Girl is the do-it-yourself ethic. You know, teach yourself to play guitar, or else if you know how to play guitar already, teach your friends.
And I saw like a lot of women just, you know, they were in bands, of course, they were guitarists, drummers, bass players. A lot of them, they were self-taught. They just picked up an instrument and started playing. I mean, that's how punk was in the beginning anyway.
A lot of people came to the meetings that were looking for other women to play with because they were like, wow, maybe I can finally find someone to play with. And one by one, met like, you know, enough people to form a band, and we just did. And a month later, we were playing our first show at a Riot Girl event.
The museum was a really good outlet for those of us who were more visually artistic rather than, you know, musically.
Zines, you know, just started like punk rock records as a way of just being able to get things in writing, of having access, of being able to do something yourself, since, you know, the media can be really inaccessible.
They're not a magazine.
This girl Laura talks about that fanzine Sister Nobody, where she talks about being a freak amongst freaks, and she's talking about being a dyke in the punk rock community. It's great because you start to sort of lose faith in something, and it completely flips its shit. You know, it totally changed as far as I'm concerned. It'll never be the same again.
It's kind of like getting to do editorials every week for the New York Times without having to censor yourself.
It's the same thing. The people that know how to do film, who have had access to schools, are teaching the other people, like, on the set as we shoot. And so all these women, like, both in New York and San Francisco where I've shot, are learning how to film or how to be part of a crew, you know, or just even, like, how to organize, you know, to actually make a film happen.
But all I can say is this, is that in the last 7 months, my life has completely changed. Thanks to the women that I've been involved with in this organization, or this movement, or whatever you want to call it. And it's been the most wonderful opportunity I've ever had. And I love each and every one of them and feel extremely fortunate to know them.
Like, Riot Girl really helped me come out.
Our impact is meant to be felt by people who are at the meetings, not about reading about it. So that's the whole point. To me, it's very important for young women to be involved in the creation of their own culture and their own music and their own poetry and stuff, rather than just being passive consumers of culture.
And now I feel like I shouldn't have to hide anything about myself. You know, watch out.
What she wants, the revolution's coming in her hands, the revolution. When she talks, I hear the revolution in her kiss. What does the revolution? Rebel girl, rebel girl, rebel girl, you wanna create that world. Rebel girl.
Try to mute it. Can I? Is it possible to mute it? You know?
Yeah, there's a mute button on the remote also.
Oh, okay.
Or
Cool.
you can.
Yeah, because I tried to mute the. I tried to mute it through the computer, then I went. Perfect. I'm going to read an excerpt of a piece that is coming from a zine during that period of time. It's called Daydream Nightmare. 1. Twilight arrives. A girl is crying on the floor like spilled milk, half sleeping, half weeping, her swollen big brown eyes cracking open, shielded only by her arched eyebrows. A collective murmur takes her mind's eye from a white blur to a soft focus. When Esperanza lifts her veiled eyes, there are 2 windows behind her, displaying a New York City scape. On the walls are her paintings, and her hands are still stained with acrylic paint colors. She finds herself in an otherwise empty room, emptier than it had ever been. Location, 31st Street and 5th Avenue, 14th floor. Esperanza suspects that the 13th floor was skipped. A series of stories had thrown this otherwise robust, determined young woman from one scenario to another, with the backdrop becoming more menacing of late. Yet she was stimulated creatively by a world completely foreign to her. The last ending has left her in debt to, and therefore in the hands of Gonzalo, the lackey of a king of slumlords. She lives in a building he manages, in a hotel that takes up a small street block, along with people on parole. She met Gonzalo through Senen, and in turn, she had met Senen on a frigid night on St. Mark's Place after the most curious event of her life. Silly, really, nothing that any serious adult would believe. Melissa, the drummer of Lucy Stoner's, her girlfriend Diane, a high-fashion photographer, and Trixie from Weehawken, had been planning a day trip to the beach in New Jersey, and they invited Esperanza. Esperanza, with her long coils of hair, large muscular hands, and quick wit, had a much simpler life back then. Her studies as an illustrator were going well. It was more than she had ever dreamed of as an immigrant having arrived from South America as an 8-year-old child. Now, 10 years later, she was making connections and getting contracts with high-profile companies. Her determination and drive were strong. So she was glad to spend the day on the beach and celebrate her hard-earned success. Tired from the sun, on their way back from Melissa's Jeep, Esperanza's hair had a scent of sea mist and was looking wild and unkempt. They then happened by a parking lot of a thrift shop. The thrift shop store was closed, but there was a big mound of what looked like somebody else's garbage in a drop-off box in the rear. Upon closer inspection, Esperanza noticed the Ouija board. The 4 girls played around with the board in the car together, and the letters M-A-D were spelled. M-A-D. Madeline, they shouted. How old are you, Madeline? The number 7 came up. So the girls decided that there was a sweet lost spirit, a girl by the name of Madeline, like the girl in the French children's storybook. When they got to the railroad apartment on St. Mark's Place, they put the board game away and they forgot all about it. It wasn't until the dead of winter that Trixie was walking behind Esperanza and said, "With the pale yellow dress and wool coat, you look just like that little girl." And both of them said suddenly, "Madeline!" They had forgotten all about their sweet little friend who waited for their company on the other side. So they ran home to St. Mark's Place, and since no one else was home, they pulled the dusty box out and played just the 2 of them. The events that followed are not clear in anyone's mind. The letters repeated, M-A-D, M-A-D, M-A-D. Trixie got scared and pulled her fingers away, and at once a cold chill took over Esperanza. The force of the chill was pushing Esperanza out and taking over her body. It wasn't until Melissa suddenly got back to the house and placed her hand on the crown of Esperanza's head and yelled and struggled that the force dissipated. Then Trixie looked at Esperanza with different eyes, and so did Melissa. From that point on, none of the girls saw each other again. Esperanza walked out into the dark night alone and felt a void on the earth, a vacuum. She walked across the street to Cafe 9, and there was Senen. Senen with the deep circles and spheres in her eyes. Senen with the hollow laugh and the distant smile. Senen, the queen of the drifters, as she said. Most of all, Senen, the santera. Esperanza was drawn to Senen as if it was a trance. Senen had a way of looking very young at times and then ancient and tired other times. It was as if you could see many people inside her. Senen would draw pictures of people she met from the spirit world. She saw in them auras that radiated from the center of their body outward. The drawings looked like images of aliens. This fascinated Esperanza and pulled her into the world of Santeria and rituals. Perhaps the 2 events with Madeline and Senen were not related, but Esperanza was later convinced that this was the day she had a hex placed on her. Thanks.
Next up, we have Jeremy Douglas, UC Santa Barbara. Jeremy will be showing a piece of a piece for the first time called "If You Turn To." I hope you enjoy it because I'm excited to share it. So let's see if we're back. Good. Okay. So, oh yes. Although the audio for this piece will be me, and I will talk about that very briefly. Working with large corpora of interactive text and getting more interested in the roots of interactive narrative writing, especially some of the women who did the first innovative interactive writing in the 20s and 30s, who weren't part of the canonical stories I learned about, like the Oulipo and innovation and in the 60s and 70s. And as the story unfolded and got deeper and further back, I got very interested in this idea of this larger body of statements about if you could do something in a story, what would you do next? I came out of a background working with information visualization. I was writing code to work with archives, like this is part of the piece that you're about to see. When you run it, the code is moving through a set of files and accumulating, matching and accumulating if you statements from these interactive texts. It's harvesting them and compiling them, and because part of what I was doing was structural narratology, it's building a map that shows you all of the traces and all of the paths. But that turned out poetically to not be interesting to me. So the program has finished running, and you can see right here that it has assembled a collection of texts and is keeping track of what goes where and how, when, and why. This is part of the apparatus of the piece, which is an apparatus and a matter and a material that is kind of hand sculpted and crafted. So if you turn to, will end up being both. I want to publish the open source apparatus for people to use for their own purposes and on their own matter, and then it's a series of named pieces. In this case, HTML files that look like this are what's being done. So here's the a community-driven fan project to republish online in multiple languages the complete works of Joe Dever, such as the Lone Wolf series. So this website becomes the target of the project, and when I run it against this particular site, the question is, what are all of the ifs in every book Joe Dever ever wrote? What is the space? What is the space of that if? What does that look like? So here's an example of some of these PDFs from an early fantasy work, Flight from the Dark, and the kinds of statements that you might find inside it in genre fantasy fiction, drawing out of the sort of Lord of the Rings inflected Tolkien-esque fantasy moment when a lot of these genres became popular, and its slow transformation into something that looks more like this. So I was thinking about Ginsberg's Howl, Joe Bernard's I Remember, and chanting and repetition, and the way that you can build a sort of a space for possibility through listing, right? Because that was really what my reading machine was going to do for me. It was what it could do, what it wanted to do was provide lists. And so I could think about how I wanted to curate the lists, I could filter the lists, I could perform the lists, poetry being a column of air in the chest, right? And so, hence the decision to forgo fancy audio. But in the end, I wrote a performative program to help me with this, which is a list reading device. This is a very simple initial iteration. I'm going to start out with a file here, which is a file from probably the most, oh yes, pardon me. I've just added an equal sign. I'm editing the code on the fly while we're doing this together. The data has been put into the machine, and it's from UFO 5440, probably the most well-known choose-your-own adventure story ever, which contains this kind of political idea that everyone's looking for the utopian planet of Ultima, but the lexias for the planet of Ultima are hidden in the midst of this text. No choice that you take will ever take you there. And when you arrive at those pages and read them through breaking the rules of the work and cheating, it says, how did I arrive here? Oh, Ultima is not a place you arrive to through choosing. Right? So, and this has inspired many, many people since then working in interactive stories. So here's an if you turn to, unidentified objects. If you allow the ship to continue to Earth, if you ask the old man to tell you everything now, if you couldn't keep from thinking about escaping, if you cry, put me back on Earth, if you decide to explore elsewhere, if you decide to go to the Forbidden Chamber, if you decide to leave it on for a while, see what happens. If you decide to look for another way to escape, if you decide to pretend to be crazy, if you decide to stay and hope for a better chance to escape, if you decide to wait. If you demand to be returned to Earth, if you fight off the urge to sleep and try to wake up the others, if you insist on landing in the United States, if you know you can't, if you lie down to sleep, if you risk escape, if you say no, if you say 2 lines from a nursery rhyme thinking they could never predict you would say that, if you say yes, if you still try to take the band off your head, if you take the idol, if you talk to the wise-looking old man, if you throw back your head and laugh, ha-ha! If you try to find some other way to escape, if you try to get to the next chamber, if you try to think of something else, if you try to wake up the girl, if you want to risk it, if you were able to keep from thinking about escape. So that was UFO 5440. I will trouble you with a small piece of a second piece to show you how it stays exactly the same and how it changes. That was a single 120-page paperback, UFO 5440. No original words by Jeremy Douglas were harmed in the making of this poem. And this is from the complete works of Joe Denver, courtesy of the community fan project, Project Aeon. And it is, no words were curated by Jeremy Douglas in the making of this. They're only being recombined. This is, if you turn to an Aeon. If he is not, if it has not, if not. If the result is less than 20, if you abandon your search and leave the hall, if you accept a jug of the notorious ale, her offer his help, and hide in his wagon, his invitation. If you accept his offer of food, the dead priest's bargain, if you accept the drink, the guildsman's glass of liquor, the invitation, if you accept the man's offer, the meal, the offer, the old man's hospitality, the old woman's offer, the stranger's offer, if you accept their offer. If you accompany the children south, if you accompany the first mate to your cabin, if you act as if nothing has happened, if you activate the buttons again, if you advance against it, if you advance on the demons, if you agree to his conditions, if you agree to his greedy request, if you agree to the condition of the strange god, if you agree to the old man's terms, if you aid him, if you aid the people in trouble, your wounded companion, if you aim at its head, if you allow the boat to drift towards their barrier, if you ambush this patrol, if you answer the voice, if you answer believer, if you answer no, if you answer unbeliever, if you answer yes, if you approach the bar and talk to one of the barmaids, the door, and look through the peephole, the merchant at his table, the pyramid, and examine the skeletons, the tavern keep, if you approach them and ask who they are, if you approach them and tell your story, if you are still alive after the psychic ordeal, this calamity, this catastrophe, this grievous wounding, this psychic ordeal, if you are still alive and wish to fight the guards, if you are wielding any other type of weapon, if you ascend the left staircase, if you ask her if she's seen any riders pass their home, if you ask the tavern keeper, if you attempt a conversation, if you attempt to avoid the creature's ambush, to cross the chasm, to dodge this missile, to evade it, to hide from the patrol, to scale the wall, if you avoid the clearing, if you avoid this gathering, if you backtrack a little, if you bathe your hand, if you bid her good night, if you buy a drink, if you call tales, if you cannot solve the problem, if if you cannot solve this puzzle. If you confront the fisherman, the jailer, the weasel-faced man, if you confront them, one of the things that then happens, and I will make this the final comment on this piece, is that the desire for the piece to be other than it is iterative. And as I move back, I find myself wanting to add filters and add transformations and read again and add filters and transformations and read again and add filters and say, no more than 6 lines with the same verb. I don't want the word attack in this poem. Can I make a list of fantasy creatures and remove them to focalize on the ambiguity with the present and between the present and fantasy worlds? And so the process of writing the software in response to what the text is becomes the process of writing the piece.
Mhm.
And if the only rule that I follow is that I am not allowed to change the lines, but only my attention, then the software becomes a kind of a performance for attention for me that then becomes the poem. And so as we move towards the end of this alphabetical process, which you can see sometimes swerves into tedium, sometimes becomes very kind of banal, and occasionally just sort of sparks randomly with things that give you all kinds of transferences or words that seem to be speaking to one another. Then I see something that says, oh, if I could just make it to the end of this thing, if I could get everything else that everyone has to say about survival and horses out of the way, if I could make this only about horses, right? Then there's something in here about what you can do in a story and all the things the author suggested that you could do, but none of which you have to do. Those things, the things that you have to do, have all been taken out. And there's something in here in this space of choices that I get really excited about, even if in the end I'd rather run for the cover of the truth. All right, I think. Do we have anything else on the program? I think that is it for us. There are still beverages left by the front entrance. In about 10 minutes, I'm going to be ushering the workshop participants to cabs and rides to head downtown. But please hang around and help us finish things that are left there. If anyone wants to have a discussion about the pieces we've seen so far, now is the time. So on your own recognizance. Thank you to all the speakers. Wonderful, amazing work. Claudia,
Jeremy.
Thank you all.
Okay.
I think it's cool though. I don't know if you see like the similarities that I found with your work.